It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLabPGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLabPGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at fitlabpgh. Already a fan of FitLabPGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. FitLabPGH is back with another podcast interview. Remember, we are a podcast about movement where we interview people in the Pittsburgh area who make movement a priority, whether they are business owners, organizers, or people who have to have real jobs to pay the bills, but still make an emphasis to be active in their life. As you've heard me say before, we often get people by finding them on the internet, seeing what they post in social media, or also they are recommended by other people. And our guest today was recommended by an earlier podcast guest, Kelly Collier. And he is a cyclist. He is involved with making cycling a priority for people in Pittsburgh, as well as a bike racer. And I believe this is the first time FitLab Pittsburgh has done an interview in a law office. He was generous enough to invite us downtown. So there's a first for everything. Every coffee shop interview we've done has been good, and I hope that I can, after today, say that every law office interview has been good. So we are with Rick Holzworth. He is a cyclist. He is an attorney. He is the president of Prima Espresso Company bike team, and he also is on the board of directors of the Pittsburgh Bike Alliance. So Rick, thanks for realizing that we had good things to say and coming down from your office and talking to us in the conference room.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
We always start out our FitLabPGH interviews by asking, are you a Pittsburgh native? If so, what kept you here? If you're not, what brought you here?
I grew up about an hour north in Newcastle, and I've been in Pittsburgh for the last 10 years. Came down here for school when I got my master's degree from Pitt before I went to law school.
And out of curiosity, because I'm an academic geek, what did you get your master's degree in?
Teaching English.
Big difference.
Yeah, I started off as a ninth grade English teacher.
And I know when we interview people for FitLab Pittsburgh, you can kind of categorize them in two categories. People who have been active all their life. It is kind of like that was just part of the family life. Mom and dad were active, and people who kind of found it later in life. Maybe they went to college and experienced the various things of college and said, oh, I need to do something. So in your case, were you an athlete growing up? What did you do growing up to be active, or did you not do that?
I ran track and cross country in high school and ended up running track and cross country in college at Penn State Barron up in Erie. So I guess I fall into the active all of your life category. My dad and brother are both physical therapists, so movement and being active was a big part of our family dynamic. And eventually I migrated to cycling, which is where I do most of my movement now.
And I'm curious for people who always compete in sports in college. I know running, you can do very well, whether you're Division 1, 2, 3, and people who are Division 2 often become professional runners. Did you ever at any point think, I might want to try to do this professionally or become an elite level marathoner? Or did you realize either because of the talent or because it was really, really hard that just wasn't something you were going to pursue?
I thought about running at the next level in maybe 10th, 11th grade in high school. But then I had a series of stress fractures running. I think what happened is my body couldn't handle the high mileage. So I realized pretty early that I wasn't going to be an elite runner by any stretch of the imagination. And that's probably why I ended up riding a bike.
I know I had have a friend who's a physical therapist who says this with the utmost respect. Those elite level runners who can put in that mileage are genetic freaks because they can withstand those forces.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's all about being able for your body to handle the training load, right? In any sport. If you can't handle the training load, you're not going to be elite.
And I'm also curious because it seems like bike racers come from other backgrounds, or maybe they started out as little kids. Like I've got a good friend who started out as a BMX rider and kind of progressed on when he realized, I can go longer than 30, 40, 50 seconds. What was it? Was it the stress fracture specifically that made you go and say, I'm going to try a bike? Because running is pretty easy. You just need a pair of shoes. Biking, you can geek out with the technology. And I know, as Kelly told us in our interview with her, she kind of told the story of her first bike race where she got lost in the wilds of West Virginia. So what was it that made you go, I'm not going to run anymore, rather than reducing the running? Or maybe you still run, but what made you go into the bike racing? Because you are at a fairly high level, not a professional level, but a level higher than probably most people are at if they bike race.
I was really reluctant to give up on my running career, even though I had no chance of being elite by any stretch of the imagination, and I wanted to find a way to cross train as I was recovering from the stress fractures. So I picked up a bike. Before
the stress fractures, when you were in high school or college, did you pick up a bike, or did you kind of laugh at people as you ran by and they were biking?
It wasn't even that. I mean, growing up in rural Western Pennsylvania, riding a bicycle as competitive or as a form of exercise, it just wasn't a thing. I mean, nobody did it. It wasn't even on our radar.
So you picked up a bike, and there's a big difference between picking up a bike and kind of using it recreationally or using it as a cross training and being or working your way up to a category 2 cyclist, which for people who don't know, is not a professional, but it's somebody who's racing at a pretty high level. I know you and I were talking prior to recording that a Cat 2 is pretty high up. Depending on the part of the country, the category 2s may be a little bit more competitive, but whatever the level is, it means you've gone through category 5, category 4, category 3, and you're pretty good. So what was it that took you? Was it the competitiveness of the cross country and the track and field, and then the realization, wow, I can put more time in and actually not get hurt, and I can see my physical fitness and my aerobic capacity improve, or what was it?
When I bought my first road bike, it was at a local shop in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. And the guy who sold it to me said, you're going to start off by riding 30, 40 minutes, and then you're going to become addicted to it. And eventually you're going to wake up one day and say, if I'm not doing a 4-hour ride today, there's something missing from my life. And at the time, I couldn't even imagine riding a bike for 4 hours. Now, as my wife will tell you, I'll disappear for 4 hours on the regular basis. So it became an addiction, in a good way. And I'm a type A personality. I mean, everything had to be bigger, better, faster, stronger the whole way through.
I'm always curious with bike riders because I know the perfect number of bikes is N+1, where N is the number you currently have. How many bikes do you have currently?
7.
I think that's the record. I have said in the past, I believe when I was in grad school, I had as many as 12 in my apartment. So I'm down to 4. So it is an addiction.
12 is a reasonable number. 4 is not enough.
I'm actually considering another one. I would agree with you.
I'm really glad my wife doesn't listen to podcasts because if she found out that I have 7 bikes, it would be a serious issue in our marriage.
I do have a friend who's married for many years. And when he brings a new bike in, he makes sure it's the same color as one of the other bikes she has, so she doesn't notice.
I've brought new bikes into the house and she hasn't noticed for several weeks. And that's not recommended because when she did find out, it was a bigger problem than it would have been if I would have been honest up front.
And I think it's important for people who are maybe looking at this and looking for ideas to move. Even though Rick and I think the perfect number is N+1 or 2, you really only need one bike. I mean, that gets you out. And then as you get more, as he termed, and I think in a good way, addicted, you realize, well, I have a road bike. If I had a bike with little wider tires, maybe I could do some mountain biking. And there's some great mountain biking around here. Then you think, well, when the roads are muddy and sloppy and a little bit icy, if I had a cyclocross bike, then I could ride on the road and I could do those 4-hour rides, which maybe I couldn't do off-road because it's too muddy in the spring. And then the next step, and I'm kind of wondering on this, is you look at the trails in the winter and realize, if I had a fat bike, then I could maybe go off-road even if there were 3 or 4 or 5 inches of snow. So have you dropped down the fat bike rabbit hole yet for off-season training?
I have a plus bike, 27.5 B 3-inch wide tires. I haven't gone the full fat bike route yet.
But still, compared to a mountain bike, it's essentially a fat bike.
Exactly. You're describing my thought process here in all my purchases.
Curious about when you decided to go from the cross training. Obviously, at some point you gave up on the running. It's a lot more fun, people have said, with biking, and I agree that if you have an hour and a half or 2 hours, you can get so far out compared to running and see a variety of things. What was the next step for deciding, I'm going to try bike racing?
For me, when I first got into cycling, it was actually frustrating because it took longer to get a good workout in. You could get a good running workout in 20-30 minutes. 20-30 minutes on the bike is not nearly enough. So it started off, if I got 45-minute ride in, I was pretty happy. And then it got to the point where I, was doing an hour and a half ride. And I got in my mind that if I was able to average 16 miles per hour for an hour, then I could try bike racing. And I started off doing 14, and then a couple of years later, I got up to 15, and then a year later, I got to 16. And I said, okay, now is the time I'm going to enter my first bike race. I can do 16 miles per hour for an hour. That's fast. I was immediately dropped from my first race, and I ended up riding for 40 miles by myself. So I realized pretty quickly that 16 miles per hour for an hour is not fast at all. And that's when the competitive nature kicked in. And I said, you know what? I really need to figure out how to go faster.
And that's something, as you find other people to ride with, that happens. And also just the time of doing it. I don't think you're the first person or the last person to be dropped with a bike race. I'm fortunate or unfortunate enough. I don't really bike race. I have done some. My first race was in Colorado, and I think I stayed with the pack for about 35 seconds and spent, as you did, 40 or 45 miles going, this sucks. I cannot believe that I am doing this. And then proceeded to do it again and again. You go to law school. Are you biking then?
I tried my first bike race before I went to law school. And that's when I realized I wasn't fast. I needed to find people to ride with because you just can't do it by yourself. So you need to get a community around you to help you ride better and faster. And then I didn't do my next bike race until after I graduated from law school. So there was a 5-year span from my first bike race to my second bike race.
Were you biking while you were in law school, even though you weren't racing?
So cycling took a different turn for me after that first race. I was kind of upset with myself and didn't think I had it in me anymore to be a competitive athlete anymore. And cycling became a way to get around town. So through law school, I was mainly riding a bike to commute to and from my apartment to school. But then I realized pretty quickly that the life of a graduate school student is pretty sedentary, and I ended up gaining 35 pounds during law school, and woke up one day and said, you know what, this is not an okay place for me to be. And that's when I got serious about riding the bike again.
It's interesting. I interviewed a physician earlier in the week who came to the same conclusion after gaining weight with running. It's like, I need to do something because this isn't good. And I would imagine with relatives as physical therapists, as they looked at you, there was probably a lot of family pressure saying, hey, you need to do something because you're not going to be surviving very long.
It wasn't a genuine concern for my health. It was more shaming. And so that's the way things work in my family.
And although we don't necessarily approve of shaming, if it's among family members or if it's among fellow bike racers, that's considered appropriate.
I would agree with that.
You decide to make the next step for trying a second bike race after, and I say this as somebody who commiserates and has been in a similar experience after getting dropped off the back of your first bike race. What was the impetus after commuting, gaining some weight, losing some weight to go, I'm going to give this another shot? Because many people would say, well, I'm done with law school. I'm a lawyer. I'm a professional. That was fun in the back, and I can hang out at the bar and tell people about when I was a bike racer or when I rode. But now it's time to get on with my life. And clearly you have not done that. You've said, this is part of my life. So exercise is not an accoutrement. It's part of your life.
Yeah, it's a huge part of my life, and I don't think I was bragging to anybody at the bar about that one time I got dropped at a bike race. So I needed better stories. So maybe that was subconsciously that was part of my decision to try a bike race again. But I just went out and did it, and I did much better the second time around. I joined up with a team. I went on some group rides. I realized that you need to have a coach, somebody who knows how to race bikes to teach you and guide you along the way. And I started doing it the right way, or what I thought was the right way, and started to see a little bit more success.
I know people are listening to this, and we've said you're an attorney. I think from reading your bio, you've got a wife, and I believe you have a small child too. People are going to say, how does he find time to do this? Because people often say, I don't have time to exercise, or when they look at things in their life, exercise kind of is the last thing that they make a priority, even though potentially it could have some of the most benefits for keeping them in a high quality of life for numerous years. So how do you find the time, or how do you make the decision that this is something I'm going to continue to do?
It needs to be a priority for me. If I don't do my workout as soon as I wake up in the morning, it ain't going to happen. Life gets in the way. I have a daughter who's going to be 2 in September. I have a wife who works. I mean, we all have family obligations. We all have professional obligations. And for me, I need to make the decision that I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going to do my workout, because if it's not a priority that I do the first thing of the day, it's just not going to happen. And commuting is a big part of it as well. The idea of spending a half an hour each way in a car is a really easy way to fall into this repetitive, sedentary lifestyle. But if you get up in the morning and you get on your bike and you ride 45 minutes to work, you're opportunistically getting your workout in. You're making your health better. You're taking advantage of time you would spend going from one place to another. To break it down, 2 things. You need to be very opportunistic in the way you find time to train, and you need to make training a priority. For me, that's first thing in the morning.
And from what you're saying, you also commute to work some of the time, all of the time, year round?
All the time. And that's why I have so many bikes. I need the right tool for the job. I need my dry weather bike. I need my wet weather bike. I need my slushy weather bike.
And I think Rick hit on that. If you're listening, he alluded to the fact that it's a 45-minute commute or so.
Yeah, it's about 10, 11 miles from my house to the office.
So if the goal is not to race, but just to have some fitness, if somebody did that, or you just did that with 20 plus miles a day, 5 days a week, you've already got a significant fitness level just doing that without doing the additional early morning workouts or group rides. That's
a totally respectable training load, I think. I mean, if you're getting an hour and a half of exercise a day, or even 3 or 4 days a week, that's a pretty serious amount of exercise.
And I would imagine also with a wife and a child, then you get home, you've got a workout in, you've kind of decompressed from whatever stresses of work, and you walk in and you're ready to engage with that, rather than thinking, okay, if I can just get the kid to bed, I can hop on the trainer for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, but then you need to spend time. I need to spend time with my wife too. So hopping on the trainer after the baby goes to bed is not ideal for her. But you're right. If you get the workout in during the commute, then you're not worried about it when you get home at the end of the day.
And out of curiosity, does your wife bike also, or is she active also? Or are you kind of the unusual one?
No. My wife is very active. She does not bike. She's incredibly supportive of cycling and the lifestyle choices that I've made. She is a swimmer. She played water polo in college. And so, yeah, we have a very active family.
I just interviewed somebody for Moving to Live who was a water polo player in college too, and he told me a little about it. That is a crazy and incredibly difficult sport. So props to her.
Yeah. So when we went to college together at Penn State Barron, and they were starting for the first time a women's water polo team, and she had some friends who were doing it, and they said, "Oh, Katie, you can swim. Why don't you come play water polo?" And it turns out that being able to swim well and playing water polo are not really the same thing.
Yes. So you've described how you make exercise, and specifically cycling in your case, a priority. But one of the things that you do in addition to that is you, in essence, try to bring other people into the sport and recognize that not everybody is active. You are the president of La Prima Espresso Company cycling team, and you're also on the board of directors of the Pittsburgh Bike Alliance. So I want to finish up with the Bike Alliance because I think that's important. That can get more people involved, even if they aren't competitive. How did you go from bike racer to a little bit better bike racer to saying, I'm president of a cycling team? And for people who don't understand cycling, what does it entail to be on a cycling team, and what does it entail to be president?
So the way cycling in most places in the United States works is our governing body is USA Cycling. It's the Olympic organizer for the sport of cycling, like USA Tennis, USA Golf, USA Cycling. And being a member of a team is joining a sanctioned cycling, a team that is sanctioned by USA Cycling. And there used to be a requirement on USA Cycling that each team had to put on a race. And a few years ago, they disbanded with that requirement. And what we saw was a very significant drop in the number of races available. So a group of friends and I decided to start our own team and this team would make promoting races a priority. So we had opportunities to use our fitness and train and have events locally for us to compete in. And that was really the impetus for starting the La Prima Espresso Company cycling team.
And for people who are not familiar with cycling teams, typically they have sponsors that help pay for jerseys, help to pay for organized races. And in return, they get advertising. So cycling and coffee are very closely linked. Do you have any other sponsors that you'd like to thank for this?
Yeah, GNC is a local Pittsburgh company with obviously an international presence, and they've been a really great supporter of endurance sports with the Pittsburgh Marathon and our cycling team. Fox Rothschild, my law firm, has been a supporter in some of the charity events that we've done, like the Tour de Cure for diabetes. And we very recently started a partnership with Baron Batch, who is the street artist from Pittsburgh, used to play for the Steelers, and he has spray painted helmets and let us use some of his tags on our cycling kits. So those are some of our supporters, but they've been a big part of what we've been doing. Are
we going to see sublimated Baron Batch jerseys that you sell for a charity or to raise money for the team?
That is a great idea. Let me write that down.
So not only do you put on races, but you also do charity events to make awareness for cycling and specific charities.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been involved with the American Diabetes Association Tour de Cure for, I think, 3 years now. And one of the things that we've done with that event is bring a Gran Fondo element to the event. And that was to attract competitive cyclists to a charity event by having timed competitive segments to the ride. And that's been good for the organization. It's been good to get the racing community involved in charity events.
I know a number of people listening, probably the majority, are not aware of what a Gran Fondo is. If you can kind of just describe that. I know it's growing wildly, and there's some great ones, not only across the U.S., but also across the world.
Yeah, so a Gran Fondo is a cross between a bike race and a fun bike ride. And so rather than racing from the beginning to the end, you ride together as a group in a social setting, and then there are specific timed segments where the riders will compete for the best time in those segments. It's almost like an organized Strava KOM hunting competition. which a lot of your listeners might not know about either. But
and I know that it's possible that you can do that to be very competitive. You can ride with a race team, or you can ride as an individual and try to go as fast at those time segments. Or there are some people who just do the Gran Fondo type race, not races, but events, because there's usually some pretty sweet swag. And it's also very many times it's the terrain is interesting. I know there's one out in California wine country. There's one in around South Carolina. So you can go, and maybe it's a little bit longer, or it's more interesting than just the typical 10-mile bike tour, not to downplay the importance and how much fun that can be.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, Gran Fondo is I think of it as a middle step between just being a casual rider around town to being an ultra competitive rider. It gives everybody something to enjoy.
Clearly heavily involved in cycling. Before I find out a little bit more about Pittsburgh Bike Alliance, some sort of bucket list cycling event that you're going to do at some point in the future that you want to try?
No specific event. A couple of years ago, my wife and I took our baby moon, and we went to the Netherlands with a group with another couple for the beginning of the Giro d'Italia, and so we saw the first 3 stages of the Giro. I was riding the race course before the races actually started, and that was a lot of fun. So I think one of my bucket list items is to go to Italy or France to do some of the epic climbs of the Tour de France or the Giro there.
Final thing I want to talk about is the Pittsburgh Bike Alliance, because if it isn't enough to have a wife, a child, or a full-time job, race bikes, be the president of a racing team, you're also on the board of directors of the Pittsburgh Bike Alliance. So it's not only activity as a priority, but you're kind of making sure that you're passing it on and making other people aware of how important it is. If you could kind of describe what's the Pittsburgh Bike Alliance and how did you get involved with that?
I was asked to be on the board of directors by Kathy Rogers, who owns Aerotech Design Cyclewear. They manufacture cycling clothing here on the north side of Pittsburgh, and she's been a great supporter of cycling and its growth in the area. And she asked me to be a member of this board, which operates the Healthy Ride bike share system. In New York, they call it City Bike. In DC, they call it something else. But a lot of the big cities now have these bike shares. And for a small fee, you can rent a bike, ride it to where you need to go, and drop it off. And I really think that this is the future of movement and transportation in the urban setting. And I think it's important. It was important to promote that by being a part of the board of directors. And I've been on that board for just over a year now.
And I think if I'm correct in my remembering what I read on the googly web, bike sharing like that is very common / popular in European cities.
Yeah, I think it was probably popular there before it became popular here. But I think like Americans often do, we were perfecting the system.
We've had the good fortune to talk to Rick Holzworth. He is a bicycle racer, but he also passes it on, and you can tell from the interview that bicycling is a passion for him. And as part of that movement, I think he's given us a great idea of what it's like to be a bike racer, but also allow you to realize that if you're not sure what type of movements you want to be involved in, even if you never race, cycling is probably one of the best things. I know my dad is 82 or 83, and he still cycles in to get the mail and things like that when he has time, because quite honestly, it's fun. So as the Queen song once said, get on your bike and ride. Rick, I want to thank you for talking to FitLab Pittsburgh. I've really enjoyed this and learning more about your journey to become a cyclist.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLabPGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLabPGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.